Okay, let's unpack this. We're taking a deep dive into some new research today.
Yeah, it's focused on a really interesting development in how large language models reason. The LLMs we hear so much about.
Right, and our mission basically is to figure out the core problem this research is tackling, and maybe more importantly, the academic innovation it proposes.
Exactly. So you know how powerful LLMs are now, especially with things like chain of thought reasoning,
Mm-hmm. Curti.
where they show their work step by step.
Right, like showing your work in math, it's crucial for complex stuff, logic problems, detailed questions. Super powerful, yeah. It really unlocked a new level, but these sources point out a kind of inefficiency, don't they?
They do. The models, they often default to that complex step by step thinking, even for really simple questions.
Ah, okay. So like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut,
Exactly. It's massive overkill. Think using a supercomputer for 2 plus 2, all that extra thinking generates loads of extra text, extra tokens.
which means higher costs, more compute time.
Pointlessly, yeah. So there's this clear need for LLMs to be, well, smarter about when to actually use that heavy duty thinking.
Right. So the big question the researchers were asking is essentially, can an LLM learn to decide? Can it figure out, okay, based on this question, do I need to go deep, think step by step, or can I just give a short answer?
And that's where this Thinkless framework comes in. That's what the sources focus on.
Thinkless. Okay. And it's not just a fixed rule, right? The idea is the model learns this.
Precisely. That's the key. Thinkless trains the model to make that decision right at the very beginning. The first thing it outputs isn't the answer, it's a special token.
Like a signal.
Yeah, either short for a direct response, or think to signal it's going to do the whole chain of thought thing first. The model itself chooses.
Okay, fascinating. So how does it actually learn to choose well? The sources mention a two-stage training process.
Yes. First stage is supervised warm-up, kind of like basic training.
Okay.
You show good examples. Examples of really solid, long-form thinking from an expert model for hard problems, and examples of concise, accurate, short answers from another expert for the simple ones.
So it learns how to do both styles depending on the signal token.
Exactly, it learns the skills. But then comes the second stage, the reinforcement learning, which is where it learns when to use which skill.
Ah, the RL part. And this is where the main academic innovation comes in, right? Because standard RL had problems.
It did, a big one, something called mode collapse.
Mode collapse. What does that mean here?
It means the model basically gives up on one of the options. It stops using either short or think effectively.
Why?
Because the standard RL algorithms, they were trying to learn from all the generated text, the answer, and that first decision token.
Okay.
But the signal from that single crucial decision token, the short or think, was just too weak compared to the signal from all the words in the actual answer.
Ah, so it got drowned out, like one voice in a huge crowd.
Exactly. So the model couldn't really learn the nuance of when to choose which mode. It just collapsed onto favoring one, usually the short one, because the learning signal for the choice itself was just too diluted.
I see. So the complex decision making couldn't really take root.
Right. And figure 3 in the paper shows this really clearly, how the think mode just vanishes using standard methods.
Okay, so how did Thinkless, or specifically this algorithm they developed, decoupled GRPO you mentioned, how does that fix it? This is the innovation.
Yes, this is the core academic contribution. Decoupled GRPO, or DGRPO. The idea is actually quite elegant. They decouple the learning signals.
Decouple, meaning.
Instead of one reward trying to optimize everything, they split it. They have one reward signal focused only on getting that initial choice token right, deciding short or think, and a separate signal focused on getting the answer tokens right, given the mode it chose.
Ah, okay. So you're essentially giving the decision part its own dedicated feedback loop, making sure its voice gets heard, so to speak.
Precisely. By having a separate, properly balanced signal just for that initial choice, DGRPO ensures the model gets clear feedback on how well it chose the mode, independent of how good the final answer was.
And that stops the mode collapse. It lets the model learn that tricky balance between accuracy, which often comes from think, and efficiency from short.
Exactly. It allows stable learning of that trade-off.
And the results. Did this DGRPO approach actually work well?
Remarkably well, according to the sources, across different reasoning tasks like Minerva Algebra, GSM-8K, Thinkless cut down the use of that heavy think mode massively.
How much?
Anywhere from 50% to even 90% reduction on some tasks. Huge efficiency gains. And crucially, it did this while keeping performance high, sometimes even slightly improving it.
Wow. So way fewer calculations, way fewer tokens, but still getting the answers right.
Yeah, on Minerva Algebra, it used like only a third of the tokens compared to always using chain of thought, with almost no drop in accuracy. And it learned to think more on the genuinely harder problems, like AIM questions. It adapted.
And there was that weird U-shaped curve in the training graphs. What's going on there?
That's a really cool sign of the learning process. Initially, it might overuse think because that's safe and accurate. But as the RL training progresses and it gets better at giving correct short answers, it starts shifting simpler problems to that efficient mode.
So the use of think goes down for a while.
Right, forming that dip in the U. It shows the model actively learning to optimize, to balance the effort versus the need for accuracy.
Okay, so wrapping this up, Thinkless clearly shows that LLMs can learn to be more efficient reasoners. They can learn when to think hard versus when to just answer.
Yes, and the critical academic point here is how. It's through this specific, learnable technique, decoupled GRPO, which cleverly solves the mode collapse issue by separating the learning signals. That's a real innovation for training these kinds of hybrid output models.
We saw the huge efficiency gains, 50–90% reductions in thinking while keeping accuracy high. And that U-shaped curve is like a little window into the model learning to be smarter about its own resources.
It's not just saving money or time, it's about building AI that's, well, more nuanced in how it approaches problems.
Which leads to a really interesting thought.
Yeah, if AI can learn to manage its own cognitive load, deciding when to engage complex processes, what does that tell us about intelligence itself? Artificial or, even our own?
What other kinds of maybe self-awareness or learned efficiencies might be bubbling up in these systems? Definitely something for you to think about as you go about your day.